Call the Honourable David Parker.
Thank you, Mr Chairman.
Point of order.
Mr Chairman, I just wanted to bring to your attention the recurring static sounds. We heard them earlier this afternoon and they did go quiet for a while, but they might be more than static. They could be electrostatic, and I'd hate to see colleagues from the other side of the House being electrocuted unnecessarily. Mr Speaker, Mr Chairman, I just wonder if something could be done about it.
Thank you for that. I have noticed that there was a bit of static in the microphones. There has been some work done on the microphones during the dinner break. And I'm pleased to see that the member isn't thinking about getting people electrocuted. We're past that. I call the Honourable David Parker.
It's probably a bit like being in the Libyan Parliament at the moment. It feels like a small arms fire above us. But, Mr Chairman, I want to raise two issues. First of all, I want to respond to something the Minister said about the spiralling costs of legal services and legal aid. And I would suggest that if there was one area where it was very easy to save cost, it would be to do away with the silly three strikes legislation. Right. Because if you're at risk of getting a three strikes penalty recorded against you and locked away forever, you have a greater incentive to defend the charge, and so as that you don't have that future risk of eternal imprisonment at Her Majesty's pleasure in one of New Zealand's prisons. So if you're really serious about wanting to stop wasting money in the legal system, do away with the three strikes legislation. I want to turn to another issue, which is in respect of community legal services. And the definition on page 9 of the bill, Part B, which talks about law reform and advocacy work. Now, the first community law centre in New Zealand was the Greyland Community Law Centre, which was formed in the 1970s. The second one was actually the Dunedin Community Law Centre, which was of a different model and proved to be the model for all of the rest of them. Thank you, Mr Quinn. Yes, I was one of those who was involved in the formation of that. I wasn't the leader, but I was one of the committee of people that put that together in 1979, and indeed worked in it as a volunteer off and on for a couple of decades since. Or after that. I no longer do it. Now, the prime reason that community legal aid centres exist is to provide legal services to people who can't afford or normally don't access legal services. And generally, the problems that turn up at legal aid community law centres are relatively minor, but nonetheless they're important to the people who are facing a legal problem and don't know how to negotiate their way through the system. And generally, law students, people employed by the law centres, and in both of those cases under the supervision generally of lawyers who are volunteering their time quite generously, provided legal services to help them over those small problems. It might be a fencing dispute, might be someone coming in to say, oh, do I need to go and see a lawyer if I have to dissolve my marriage? Getting pointed in the right direction. It might be something about dogs, it might be something about a small criminal penalty, it might be someone who thinks they've been unfairly charged with a traffic offence. Now, all of those things are very good, but there is an area where I think it's important that we don't let law centres stray too far, and that relates to law reform and advocacy work. Now, law reform and advocacy work is appropriate, but not when it crosses the line to being a political polemic. And if there is an area where there's this shortage of funds, these precious funds that are being used in law centres, they ought to be focused primarily on the provision of legal services for the people who need to understand their way through the law, not to change the law, not to advocate for political causes. Now, I don't mind there being some part of that, because actually in reality we should be advocating for changes in the law that come up through law centres if they have something to do with, I don't know, some minor criminal procedure. They might have experience in that and they want to submit on a bill that's coming through in front of Parliament. Absolutely no problem with that. But beyond that, I do think that we ought to control that. Now, I know that the community legal services in that definition talks of services that a community law centre provides under contract between the centre and the secretary, and so I'm asking for confirmation, Minister, that in the contract there are appropriate controls on non-legal advice services, i.e. these advocacy services, which can on occasions go too far in the promotion of political causes. And I have seen that occur. And I think that one of the reasons why I oppose it is I think that if that becomes too prevalent, it puts at risk the strength of the claim for appropriate levels of funding for community law centres to do what is their absolutely core function, and what is necessary in society, because actually a lot of these problems, although they're very important to the individual, these low-income people, not powerful people in society, they're not able to pay a legal fee, they won't be eligible for legal aid because of the nature of the problem, wouldn't meet legal aid thresholds. Lawyers aren't interested in providing the services because the people can't afford to pay, and so in the absence of a community law centre you do have an unmet legal need, which is why they exist. So let's make sure that law centres focus on meeting that unmet legal need rather than crossing the line into advocacy work for political causes, which, whilst it's rare, I have seen on occasions occur.